Hi everyone. So maybe we can start now. And if people are joining later, they're most welcome to just join in the conversation. Welcome to another Ubuntu Learning Circle session. I hope you're all doing well. And today's session is focused on International Youth Day, which is basically on the 12th of August, but we're doing it a little earlier. So celebrating youth, we can do that every day. Everybody here is very much familiar with the Ubuntu Learning Circle already because you have all been to previous sessions before. So I will not go into like an introduction of the Learning Circle itself because we all know what it's about. So for Youth Day, we have a small agenda prepared today. This year, the UN's theme for Youth Day is green skills for youth towards a sustainable future. So now this session we will dive into conversations and other conversations and your opinions on this particular agenda and other questions about youth and green skills and the focus on youth in Africa, in the African continent. So we have our agenda on the screen, which Nolita is sharing. We will do a brief opening on the Youth Day, and then we have 3 engaging questions waiting for you. And then, because we could not spend so much time in the last 2 sessions on community news, we will be spending a little bit more time on it this session so that everybody can share their news from your experiences, things that you've been doing recently that you would like to share with the group. And that's it. We have, as you know from the last sessions, we have also been pivoting towards a working group who is now going to go forward and design some of the elements of the Ubuntu Learning Circle. And at the end, we would like to give you a small update on how the working group was going to be proceeding. Thank you. So, okay. So for Youth Day, so for Youth Day, it's basically a UN theme. The world, as we all know, it slowly needs to embark towards like a green transition and a more environmentally sustainable and climate friendly. And the climate friendly world needs the active participation of youth worldwide. And the African continent is more susceptible to a lot of climate effects because a lot of these okay, so a lot of the climate changes effects are happening more harshly in the continent of Africa, or in a lot of the places of the majority world than it is in the minority world. And these things need to be addressed in a very contextual, in a very contextual and knowledge, and with the knowledge from the specific geographical location itself. So with keeping that in mind, we had some questions that we would like to address to the group as a whole, with focus on the African continent and the African youth, to try to figure out how, moving forward, we can take the definition that the UN has provided or the theme that the UN has provided for this particular Youth Day, this year's Youth Day, International Youth Day, and see what discussions come up within this Ubuntu Learning Circle session. This could also mean experiences from your own work that you do with youth and with the environment, with climate change, as well as particularly with youth in Africa. Maybe share the screen again, please. So our first question is, so we all know the UN definition of green skills, which is knowledge, abilities, values, and attitudes needed to live in, develop, and support a sustainable and resource efficient society. Our first question regarding this particular definition is, does it address all the pertinent issues, and how can we improve this particular definition? And what transformation in education are necessary for bringing the skills into the African continent? Um, I, I would like, maybe I would like to start with a small prompt, as in, we all know that um, different regions and cultures have varying environmental priorities and challenges. So a one-size-fits-all definition might not account for these variations. So it might lead to exclusions of region-specific skills and knowledge. So this might not be just about how can we bring these skills into the African continent, because the skills might already be there in the African continent itself. And maybe the question, maybe then we should discuss on what should be termed as green skills, which are already there within the African youth, within the African culture, and already existing within African societies, that you have experience with, that would go forward to uh, a more sustainable and regenerative climate uh, and life. Is there anybody who would like to volunteer information?
I'm in the meeting. I'm ready to contribute.
Please go ahead, John.
I think the two words that seem to be collective words that would be useful would be mindset. You know, the green skills requires the development of a mindset, and then associated with the mindset is lifestyle, a shift in lifestyle. So yes, there are some who are living in relative, let's say, subsistence economies, where the lifestyle requires a respect for the interconnection between the earth and living. But the metacognition of that is what we're talking about, the raising the consciousness, enabling people to understand that becoming fully human is understanding our relationship as an integral part of the natural environment, and not as the owners, if you like, or even the custodians. So I think the last thing about the Africanization of this particular piece is to keep building around the words interconnected and interdependent. You know, keep holding those words, that in the mindset is the realization of the interconnectedness of all elements of calling it green is too loose in a sense, but all elements of the natural reality in which we are located. And then we have to grow the interdependence. And in order to do that in Africa, we must look back to what we know. So we go to the heritage of Africa, not to new science. Of course, new science is helpful, but we must contextualize this as remembering what we know, not learning something new.
Thank you, John. That's actually very informative, because you have brought in the human element in an otherwise very technical definition that has been given by the UN. So this actually opens up the field for what is really important going forward, to recognize that we are all humans, to recognize that we are all interconnected, and then shift ourselves towards a more regenerative world. And you have your hand raised.
If you could just add to that little note of the heritage. I do believe the word heritage is critical to to this mindset shift,
Yes.
reclaiming.
Yes, maybe the skills that we are talking about is already present within the vast heritage and
It's in
knowledge.
our language,
Yeah.
it's in our history, it's in our family value system and so on. It's just got to be remembered and reclaimed.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, John. Anne, you had your hand raised. Please go ahead.
We'd just like to ask a little question to John. Can you explain a little bit more what you mean, or what you meant when you said enabling people to understand? The part about understanding. Could you explain that? Yeah.
Yeah, I think there is a certain amount of survival in a subsistence space. Often there is a survival thinking and a kind of hand-to-mouth existence where the aspiration is to escape that interdependence and to rise above it, as opposed to reclaiming it as a strength in itself and building it, developing it as a solution, not seeking the solution beyond what is already happening. So if we go back to African reality, is that green vegetables were grown. Mfini was the green vegetables, and they've been grown for years and cooked for years. But there's almost a reversal of status where you don't want to grow spinach because or cabbage, it's a cheap vegetable. So you go to a supermarket to buy something that is 4 times the cost, and it's just been packaged well. So to remember that there was a reason our grandparents grew the spinach and cooked it in iron pots to make sure that the iron deficiencies were dealt with. There's the heritage element. So, but once people understand and there was a reason for that. It wasn't just desperation. It was actually beautiful science that was happening, and now we can call it science.
Is there not a problem that in development economy or development aid or whatever we want to call it, development thinking, it's usually thought that subsistence economies equal poverty?
Yeah.
So, and people, I mean, if that is the colonial message that you keep hearing, that you're underdeveloped or in development, and that requires letting go of that interdependent and interconnected lifestyle to get things in the supermarket. How are we gonna change that by giving young people skills?
And we call it, in South Africa anyway, we call it the informal economy because it can't be taxed. So we've got these two economic systems. The one is the formal, where we can tax. So that makes it good. But where people are just surviving, and it doesn't even get factored into GDP because it doesn't have a formal way of putting the tax on it. But how absurd is that? That we have to push it out of its very strength in order to make it valid and to make it a contribution to the economic reality of a country. If you get everyone off the grid and everybody is growing their own food, that for the economists might be disaster. Because now what? Now what have we got? We can't quantify this and tax it.
Lindelwa, you have your hand up. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to be on camera. I'm lying in bed. I've got a terrible cold. But I find this discussion very, very useful. Thank you, John. I think your inputs are quite useful. I just want to bring in another angle. The transition to a green economy, especially in Africa, or rather, let me also say in South Africa, is something that we must think through very carefully. there is already some discussions in some sectors about just transition. So, for instance, if you close down a mining company in Mpumalanga, because Mpumalanga is big on mining, what other forms of businesses do you come up with? Because there are thousands of families that are supported through coal mining at the moment. So the transition must be such that we look at other areas, for instance, tourism, and also when we come up with the new forms like your solar, there will be opportunities there. The maintenance of solar, some parts, spare parts that you need for these new forms of energy. So there has to be thought around that, and preparation of young people for those new skills that we will need. So it's something that we need to think through very, very carefully, because the just transition is not going to be overnight. But we also need to take the opportunity as we do the just transition to create other forms of economic activity that will be broader and allow and localized as well. I think John was also talking to that in a way. How do you ensure that local economies benefit as you transition into this green economy? Let me leave it at that for now. Thank you very much. It's a good discussion.
Thank you, Lindelwa. That was a very, very relevant point that you have brought up, because in reality, these are, of course, things that we have to think about. This also brings in like more questions in my head. For example, when we are talking about green skills, and if you're talking about a transition of skills of workers, for example, from the example that you gave from, for example, the coal mine has shut down and the workers now need skills to go into other forms of labor. Now, is this something that falls under the purview of them learning green skills? And the end of the day, who is taking responsibility for teaching these green skills to these people? Is it the government? Is it other societal institutions? So these are also things that come up when we are thinking about the reality of these just transitions, and how then can this work? So thank you, Lindelwa, for this input. Is there anybody else who would like to say a few more words on this particular topic?
Yes, I would like to
Please go ahead,
add or try to yes, I would like to attempt to answer that question, like who is taking responsibility for teaching? I think the word teaching is it's sort of imposing. Like if I look at the definition, it's talking about knowledge and abilities and values and attitudes. So and John mentioned consciousness, which is very important. So these are, I believe, most of them inherent skills, right? So I don't think it should be a learner teacher type of setting, but rather that of self-discovery, like somebody who will sort of facilitate or allow the individuals to discover these skills, as we're also looking at the transformation of the education system, or how we educate or how we learn. So yeah, probably not teaching, but yeah, like I said, a journey of self-discovery and facilitating in a setting of facilitation or something like that.
it's an amazing point that you raised, Shirley, and true to your words, it is true that teaching is a very imposing and I feel a very backdated kind of an understanding of how education should proceed. So it is about learning from each other and learning from, as John mentioned, the heritage of a particular place and reclaiming skills that falls under the purview of, for example, which can now have definitions of having green skills. But Anne has raised her hand, and so has Lindelwa. So Anne, please go ahead, and after that, Lindelwa, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to Shirley for this incredibly important point. And I think what I would like to, it brings me back to the first question and the remarks of John also. I think the focus on skills is a secondary one. We don't have to reinvent skills that were, already invented by ancestors or previous generations. So there could be a kind of passing on, if you can call that teaching. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not just teaching that will prepare young people for the planetary shift ahead of us. And I think vision or dreaming or the spiritual, what kind of world do we want, and how are we part of that big, reconnecting with that bigger family and feeling the gratitude for that for me would be like the core. And I speak in all humility because I'm raised in this Western European mechanistic nature as a resource worldview. So I think having that vision again and having that experience again of being part of that bigger life tissue and envisioning what your life could be like and is like the basis of everything. And only then can you decide what do we really need to get, how much energy, additional energy do we need? And only then come the skills of, do we need solar panels for that, and what skills do we need to maintain the solar panels? So for me, it's not an either or. It's not against teaching, but the primary thing is, like Raad is saying, is like we are learning together to co-evolve, to become part of this bigger planetary life issue, and learning again to forget the colonial messages or unlearn the colonial messages and reintegrate and reconnect with the traditions and the indigenous knowledge. So I think I'm always a bit worried about UN messages because they focus too quickly on the skills and leave the question of the worldview and the epistemology. We're learning through being in the land is left out of that. And so immediately you fall into the trap of it's about teaching, it's about the colonial pedagogies. So I thank you for this wonderful discussion.
Thank you, Anne, for the input as well. Yeah, a drastic shift in educational institutions and how educational systems and institutions move forward has a big role to play in us learning about different worldviews and going back to our language heritage and all the skills that we already have learned in our lives. Lindelwa, please go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say, in addition to what has just been said, I think we must also look at other forms of co-creating and co-learning together, because this is a new space for all of us. And I work as a coach, mainly as a leadership coach. So, and we are currently as coaches grappling with how do we create awareness when we engage with leaders. There's also the issue around the inner development goals. And the focus of the inner development goals is on self-mastery. I think we know what we need to do, but as long as I think John said it, as long as the mindset and the consciousness is not at the right place, things don't move. Execution generally becomes a problem. So if we can look at that as well, more collaboration, more partnerships, more private-public partnerships as well, because remember, the private sector benefited a lot from where we are. And therefore, those private-public partnerships, I think we should not shy away from them. And collaboration and partnerships and finding a way of co-creating solutions, new solutions that will work for the youth and involve the youth as well. Because it's the youth that is going to be around in another 50 years when we are all gone. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindelwa. And while you were talking about private-public partnerships, my mind also went to that in a global level, because Africa's relationship with Europe and other of the minority world should also move forward in a more just, in a more equitable way, and in a way that they're learning from each other. And yes, John, please.
Yeah, I love the points that Lindelwa's made about co-creating and activating. You know, I think there is no such thing as learning intrinsic values. You don't learn intrinsic attitudes and values. You discover and you claim. So that's a process of conscious realization that it's not I'm acquiring knowledge. And I mean, it infuriates me actually that whenever the UN does something like this, they make it seem that it's a simple transmission of knowledge. You just learn the skills. And it's the furthest thing from the truth. We've been trying to learn the skills, you know, for years and years in Africa, and the colonial education system has failed us miserably because it detached us from the reality that our learning was in experiential learning. Our learning was in the narrative, in the storytelling, and in the intergenerational dialogue that was structured in a respectful construct where we listened and we had active listening and sharing, but also we took somebody's hand and said, come with me to the ground and plant with me. And so we have to construct and enable experiential learning opportunities in which the construction and the experience is a shared experience. There's no expert teaching a novice. There are people trying to refine and improve together, bringing everybody up to the same level of joy rather than the level of skills. You know, the joy of being able to plant and loving the consequences of that means you do it for life. Teach me the skills of planting, and when you step away, I have the skills, but I'm no longer planting because intrinsically I'm not motivated. Once I know that feeling of eating the spinach that I planted, then I do it for life.
Yeah.
Thank you, John. That was very insightful. Looking at the time, I think we should move on to the next question that we have today on youth and the SDG goals of the UN. So what does sustainable development look like in different African contexts, and what the role young people can play for this? Obviously, we go into this question keeping in mind that the SDGs are egregiously flawed. But even then, we just wanted to have a conversation about the role of young people, and particularly a young African people can have moving forward in sustainable development. If you have any experiences from your own work or any experiences from work around you, please feel free to share so that we have more insights into the very imperative role of young people in Africa.
Again, I'm happy to kick off.
Yes, please, John.
To me, the important opportunity that you're giving us is to balance some things here. That, what does sustainable development look like in different African contexts? What is the role of young people? Looks terribly cerebral. The reality is that we have a continent that is wounded, and that the young people have carried the burden of the passed down hurt, and it's internalized in different ways. So it sometimes it shows up as passive resistance, sometimes it shows up as anger, misplaced anger, but it's internalized. So for us to talk about sustainable development, we have to look back in order to understand where we are now and in order to plan the future. And so the word healing has to be inserted into this process, that there is a need for recognition that history doesn't start itself in a vacuum, that just because you're trying to start something doesn't mean you can ignore what's gone before. So the elements of recognition that people have had their heritage stolen in some ways and obscured as though it is primitive and as though it was not of value, which is what Anne was saying, then we have to go to that point and reclaim with anger, if you like, and release that blocked the progress and we were silenced in that process. So I do think that when you say what is the role of young people, we need to understand what is the role of all people. It is to activate ourselves and reactivate ourselves so that we can mourn the loss of what we lost and claim the strength that we have and the resilience that comes with that process, and turn that into the young people becoming the front end of advocacy. Young people become the leaders of new ideas, not just positioned as leaders, but true leaders, where older people just support them. I know I'm overstating that, and obviously there is the flexibility in that. But older people need to support the leadership of young people, not to think they own the idea. And that's how we will heal ourselves, in my view.
Yes, true. The intergenerational dimension comes in here, the intergenerational cooperation and collaboration, and just the understanding of each other within generations is so important to move forward in terms of addressing, as John said, all the hurt and the anger that are there in young people in whatever terms. Thank you so much, John. Lindelwa, you still have your hand up. Is it from before? Would you like to add something?
Yeah, it's from the previous one, but I just want to add to what John was saying, because I do coach young people, and I find it very sad that young people will talk about an imposter syndrome.
Exactly.
Even as leaders, those that are in the boardroom or in leadership positions, the confidence levels are not where they are supposed to be. So maybe as part of developing them, or rather helping them realize and claim the space that they belong, where they are as leaders or as team members, if they are in teams, they belong. So if we can, as part of strengthening young people, just make sure that we build their confidence levels. And also, if we can go back to the basic question that says, who am I?
Yeah.
Because sometimes young people, which is where the low confidence levels come in, sometimes I get the sense that they don't understand who they are. The conversations that we are having here and the sharing that John is having with us here, many young people are ashamed actually to claim who they are and that they are African and take pride in being African and embrace being African. So that's the starting point. And it worries me because even as leaders, if we still complain about having an imposter syndrome and that we don't belong as leaders, we will forever then look up to external, maybe Western countries for solutions and never realize that we also have a lot of contribution to make towards global challenges, because global challenges are very complex now. All of us can make, including Africa, can make very, very valuable contributions. My hand is down now. It's just that on my phone, I don't know how to do it. I'll keep trying, but don't worry if you see it up. It's not up anymore. Thank you.
You can keep it up and I can always come back to you for more insights. Thank you, Lindelwa. That's a very important aspect as well. I can say a little bit, but what I'm going to say is in the context of my own research, and my research has been in the minority world, particularly in Western Europe, where I have interviewed young people about their feelings on climate change and the things that they're doing, youth protesters, for example. And there is so much anxiety and so much fear and so much frustration among these people, among these youth. And it's solely because that they're working day on end to enable some sort of change to happen, but they're always shot down by, for example, people from the older generations working in a lot of the very important institutions who are not ready or very reluctant to shift towards change because of obviously vested interests. Now, I have seen very well the kind of anxiety that is there within young people, but for their own credit, I have also seen a lot of hope that they're not giving up. And this hope is something I feel that can lead to this sort of collaboration, this sort of understanding that can come between the generations, that this hope can fuel the process of this intergenerational dialogues. Because at the end of the day, we all need to sit at the same table and just sit and understand each other before moving forward. So that was like a short take on just my particular experience. Would anybody else like to have something to say about this particular topic?
Maybe just one last contribution to it. You know, sustainable development has to be understood not in terms of product, but in terms of people. It's the self-development of people. It's the self-liberation of people that leads to sustainability. You cannot create sustainable sort of external while the internal is unsustainable. So I do think that, again, the question of sustainable development having a strong economic overtone needs to be balanced by the strong reminder that this is about liberating voices, liberating people to be free from the fears that Lindelwa referred to, the anxieties of not being good enough, the internalized inferiority, or whatever it is, even internalized superiority. That's why the dialogue, the intergenerational dialogue is so important. How dare I show up as an expert if I'm not prepared to acknowledge that as an older man, I've contributed to the problem. I have not solved the problem. I've added. So if I can acknowledge that and acknowledge that I'm part of the problem, then in the Paulo Freire kind of context, the conversation is open. If I pretend that I have somehow been different from all the rest, and this is the same for the patriarchy, the same for all the elements of paradigm shift that we're doing, that we need to be doing in parallel. All social justice elements must start with an acknowledgement. I've had blind spots. I've deliberately looked away. I've made compromised choices, and I want to shift that. And I need young people to not lead me in that, but to lead with me to make my shifts so that they are free to not carry my baggage, but actually be free to create a new world. You know, it's that high level narrative that I think we've got to bring in to counter the idea that sustainable development is a series of steps and you just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we'll be fine.
Thank you, John. Anne, you had your hand up.
Well, John just already said what I wanted to say, but I think it's also I met in the I put in the chat. I'm reading this book, incidentally, which I discovered by a commentary that Nolita sent us from one of the participants of the intergenerational dialogues. Nolita, you remember this girl who posted this beautiful, grateful reflection, and she said it reminded her of this Leanne Simpson. So I looked up the book, and I'm like totally flabbergasted. I mean, she's such an incredible author, and she also says, you first have to have a group of indigenous leaders, if I can call it that, who take their place in the academia and the Western academia, knowing that you're instrumentalized to a certain degree. It's like greenwashing academia, or it's like bringing indigenous knowledge into the Western system so that they can pretend that they are, not colonial. And she said it's only in the second, once you have that position in there, in the second phase, those people, those leaders can open the door towards more radical, what did she call it? Like resurgence of indigenous knowledge, like leaving the academia behind in a certain way, or opening the doors of academia and reconnect with the land. And I think this is also what John is always saying with, the living labs, connect with the land, plant the vegetables, learn from the trees, learn from the squirrels and stuff like that. So it's about this leadership is indeed like in those steps in and it's not either or, like, are we being instrumentalized, by academia? Yeah, maybe to a certain degree we are, but as long as we have this vision of using that power then to take the next step, I think, I don't know if you can call that skills or whatever, but to move that forward, to bring in that new attitude.
Thank you, Anne. I will quickly ask Emran if there's something she would like to share, because she works very closely with youth and climate, and maybe something from her work, something she did recently, some of her experiences. Emran, is there something you can share with us today?
Hi everyone, good morning. Yes, so it's been a very conversation this morning, and I picked in some cues where John and some other people spoke about the African context, climate education in the African context. So I'll just kind of like give a bit of some works that we are doing here that resonates with the inputs that was given. There was an opinion on, trying to the old practices that African people are doing. And in that light, I do agree with that speaker, because we also do agree that there are certain practices in Africa, indigenous knowledge, that maybe hitherto have been termed as outmoded, but actually do contribute to climate action and not climate change. And in that light, coming October, we at the All Africa Students Union seek to bring in all and sundry. So when we talk about education, we talk about the climate space. We usually leave out individuals who are doing the creatives. So we have brought together people who are already interested in natural resources, environment, energy, everything that has to do with environment. We have brought in individuals who are already in the educational space, but this time we are focusing on the creatives, people who draw, who sing, who create poems, those who do storytelling, drama. We've brought together these people and we are actually focusing on them to tell stories on indigenous African knowledge that actually contributes to climate action. And this is one of the initiatives that we are working on that would happen in October. So that will be in Ghana as well as Ethiopia. And the reason we are doing this is because we do believe that there are certain indigenous knowledge that actually do protect the environment. Some of these green skills, I mean, there's actually nothing different when we talk about green skills. We already have, I do believe that we already have the skills when it comes to teaching, when it comes to learning, when it comes to coaching, facilitating, whatever it is that we have, entrepreneurship, innovation, we already do have it. The only difference is that whatever skills and knowledge and interests that we as Africans, as individuals or the youth possess, we have to be sure that whatever we are going into should be environmentally friendly. So this is one project that is actually bringing in the creatives to delve into their indigenous knowledge and protect the African story, to tell the story in a very positive way. And as John said earlier, the mindset and the lifestyle. So this is going to take us back old times where we used to have certain practices that was actually conserving the environment. That is one project. And another one that we have always, that's more like our core mandate, is advocating for policies and advocating for education. Currently, we have a MOOC proposal ongoing that was presented at the Corivip, I think last month. So the Corivip is was a conference of directors and vice chancellors in Africa. I think it was held somewhere in Kenya or in Uganda this year. So I do know that a lot of institutions as well as the youth, we are actively trying to inculcate climate education into the African context. And it's not just going to be a whole hitherto we used to have history, so that
I think we just lost Emran. Okay, that's we can resume when Emran's back. For now, maybe we can move on to the next question. Is she back? Great. Emran, can you hear us? Okay. We will give Emran a little bit of time to get back. And in the meantime, maybe we can.
yeah. So
okay.
sorry, I
Yes,
you.
you're back. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So the second project is about designing a MOOC proposal, and we are bringing together the SDG Center for Africa. We on board are several universities. That's the ESDA community. We have University of Kenya. We have University of Cape Coast. We have like a lot of universities from East, West, and South Africa. We are yet to incorporate North Africa, and India has already taken the step to inculcating this climate education. And we are also we've been working since last year, and we are yet to have the Association of African University to approve of this and make this MOOC proposal free and accessible to all African students. And not just African students, but if you are studying in Africa, you should be entitled to climate education. And due to internet connectivity, I would just want to just pin this down that Green Skills actually offers a promising avenue for African development. It aligns with the global trends and it fosters economic growth and addressing environmental challenges. And I wouldn't see that as a distraction. I think it's a very essential investment in the continent's sustainable and prosperous future. But if we have to tweak it to the African context, again, as one speaker said, somewhere in South Africa, mining is what is the central livelihood of the people. Are we just going to shut them down and then ask people to go look for green skills and find other opportunities? That wouldn't work. I think before we actually jump onto this global trend, we have to be extremely prepared, physically, financially. As John said, the mindset must be changed before we just jump onto the trend. Because if you jump onto a trend and if you are not prepared for it, you are going to be messed up, and that is really not a good thing. So I would just want to emphasize on our cultural and indigenous knowledge, and also the long-term viability of these projects. And preparing the African workforce with these skills will ensure long-term relevance and employability. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Emran, for sharing this, for sharing all the work that you're doing. It sounds absolutely amazing. Before moving on to the next question, which is more on green skills and African youth, and is it the right and the processes of moving forward, while we're still on the topic of what is the role of young people, I would actually like to draw in Nolita for a little bit for her 2 cents on the role of young people in Africa, because so much of her work revolves around young people in Africa. So Nolita, please, if you have anything to share.
Yes, especially on the element of leadership and intergenerational dialogues. In practice, it is a particularly interesting experience that is not, as everyone noted, is not just a process of teaching, but a process of finding like more opportunities of collaboration and learning together, which I think is repeating something that John had said. And so in the work that we're doing now is kind of trying to find the opportunities to build that shared learning. And it has its difficulties. One, in that, John, you had mentioned that, addressing attitudes such as superiority, etc. It's not only that. Sometimes it can be time, or a frustration that I've seen from a lot of people who are trying to bring in this intergenerational dialogue is that I don't like the term older generation. The seniors in the room are more than willing to offer advice, but less so to offer resources. And typically that is the number one thing that is needed. As in many situations, the best ideas at the end of the day need money or support, etc., etc. And that tends to be the most difficult thing to mobilize. I think that that's the case for all projects, regardless of how old you are, or what your age is. But that tends to be the thing that is difficult. So when we're building these bridges of creating collaboration and learning opportunities, how do we fundamentally address the need for support? So we mentioned that there are communities that are living a subsistence lifestyle, and which means that largely in terms of the basic needs, they already have a way of supporting themselves. It's not recognized institutionally, but there is already, like a lifestyle that is embedded. But then there's also a big subset of young people that are just living in urban environments, meaning that without financial support, survival is not an option, is not available, is not something that they can do. And then the opportunity with green skills is to do a holistic investment across the generations towards empowering young people by giving the support of livelihoods so that they can exercise their creative muscles into figuring out some of these challenges. That is one of the bigger I wouldn't say bigger threshold, but it is one of the thresholds that needs to be invested into considerably, because without that, I mean, I would say like a few of us in the room are example of that without people in our lives saying, I will give you this opportunity, you won't, you will have what you need. Your job is just to be creative. How many more of these opportunities can we create for young people? Because that is how you get then engage, as John had said, values are not taught. it is intrinsic. That's how you get the opportunities to really discover these intrinsic values, not in an environment where the things that are forcing you into a mindset of I need to do now, can't think about later, are eliminated.
Thank you, Nolita, for the 2 cents and a very, very realistic kind of challenges that we are facing on a day-to-day basis in terms of, finance is sometimes the biggest elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about. So thank you for bringing that up. Now we can move on to the next question, which is a more this is a question that we thought about, is if after all these discussions, I think we somewhat reached a conclusion as to how how this question can be answered, but we're still bringing it up, if are green skills an opportunity for African development, or is it a distraction? Now, obviously, the way that we are terming what green skills are, and the way we are learning, and the way we're reclaiming the skills that are already there, would obviously, in how we are terming what green skills are, it might not be a distraction. But the way it is right now, in the very technical definition of it, it could be a very detrimental kind of a process for African development. So if anybody has anything to say about this particular question, please move forward.
I
Yes,
can add
Nolita.
something because you've gotten me talking, right?
Yeah.
I would say, okay, I think the question is framed a little bit controversial, and I'll take the blame for that. But when it comes to approach, when some of these skills are brought in, like for example, we spoke about the difference between teaching and learning, etc. That that can, and also the challenges of like just transitions and certain transitions that are not considerate of the context, that can end up being much more detrimental than helpful. And I think that the framing of then the question of like, what is African development? If we don't have a clarity on what we mean by African development, then whatever skills that we're investing in then can have a high risk of becoming counterproductive, basically. Because if we understand African development to be Africa needs to catch up with the global minority, then that's contradictory. However, what we're seeing in that, I'll use the word paradigm because I can't think of a better word right now. In the paradigm of how green skills are taught, so like your traditional, the ones that Lindelwa mentioned of like being able to operate solar resources, etc., etc. The paradigm in which those skills are taught are very much of keeping all things constant, meaning keeping framework of development constant. We need to add more diversity in the skills that we're investing in. Then brings to question of what type of future we're building. If we don't bring that question, then we then put ourselves in a position where we're building a future that might not actually work that well for us later. But then there's also even more controversial questions in terms of if current trends continue. So, for example, trends of urbanization, etc., things such as energy requirements and things such as material consumption, etc., will continue to be growing needs. Meaning that if we do not create the ability to meet the energy requirements of the number of people moving into cities, then we will be creating a growing problem of people who are living in an environment that is not suitable for basic human dignity, etc. So when we go into the nuanced conversation of what skills do we need to build for a green future, is it a step of we need to ensure energy security and then we need to go towards a green transition, or what is it? These are the big debates that are happening, I guess, from what I can tell in the continent. And this is this type of nuance when it comes to asking the great questions of who do we want to be, that needs to be brought into the conversation. Without it, then we're just sprinting in a direction and we're not even sure if we're going in the right direction.
Thank you, Nolita, for bringing some very relevant points about about something super basic, like what exactly do we mean by African development? Because if that is not answered first, then we are all a bit lost on what exactly are the skills that are needed to move forward into the future. What kind of futures are we envisioning? Catherine, you wanted to say something? You had unmuted. If you do, please go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I think it's really relevant. And then I think John has his hand up too. His physical hand. So yeah, I agree with Nolita, and I think sequencing, it's kind of like this, it reminds me of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, sequencing these basic requirements for development before creating all of these new ideas, or else returning back and entering on a conceptual level. And I think there's two levels of conversation that we're having here. And on the one hand, as Nolita rightly points out, it's the basic infrastructure questions, or things like in South Africa at the moment, I hear in Cape Town there are such intense protests and riots around with the taxi infrastructure Santako, that is just completely destroying, or it's brought the whole city to a standstill because there isn't the infrastructure to support alternative transport. They don't agree with what the local government is doing in terms of just enforcing the law. So now there's no food on supermarket shelves. There's no one is able to go to work, to school, all of these things. Everything is kind of coming to a standstill. So I think unless we address these very, as you call them, basic kind of needs of, do people have the means to live a dignified life? Do people have the ability to move around a city? If there are a lot of young people moving to a city, which is the case in South Africa and a lot of African countries, the urbanized population is only going to increase, as is the young population. I think that we really do need to ask ourselves this question of, as we develop kind of building these train tracks, as we're going along, where are we going? We have to ask these two questions at the same time, but we also need to consider, what are we doing in the moment? Because it needs to be sustainable, but we also need to, we need to check in with what is this greater ideology that we're feeding into, as everyone was pointing out earlier, and this conception of the colonial conception of development versus returning back to what we know and trusting ourselves and discovering ourselves. And these are, sorry, it's a bit jumbled, but that's really the idea I wanted to get across.
No, I think you got your message across quite nicely, because yes, first and foremost, I think we all need to shatter the illusion of how things are moving right now. Currently, the whole colonial idea, the neoliberal systems that are in place, it's really, really important to shatter that illusion that this is the right way to go. John, please, you had your hand up.
Yeah, really just to build on what Kat has said, that, you need to, this is not a binary choice, obviously, to say, is it an opportunity or is it a distraction? It's both. And leadership, and we as leadership, need to distinguish between what is the distracting part and what is the real opportunity part. So I think, again, to go back to what I said before, the opportunity for reconnecting people to the heritage, and for reminding people that, in fact, Africa has many solutions that sit in the practice of the past, as well as in the language, and it's embedded in the culture and in the cultural practices and so on. It's an opportunity for the activation and reactivation and the consciousness building and the reclamation, if you like, of what we've forgotten. And in that, there should be a pragmatic strand to say, well, what are these concrete opportunities? What are the things that can be lucrative? So we don't get lost in the kind of navel gazing of self-actualizing, but actually self-actualize through action and try things. How can we get everyone to plant their own food? What are the strategies we can adopt to encourage people to reclaim the idea that you can grow vertical gardens as opposed to horizontal gardens in complex space? So I do think there is a real opportunity for looking at the green revolution, whatever we want to call it. Calling it green skills narrows it down a little bit, but I understand that's the construct we're working with. Then what is it? A distraction. So the distraction for me is that there's an oversimplification of issues. And the idea that you, as you said, as others have said, if you stop coal mining and then you just put up windmills or whatever, there's a sort of seduction in a simple, oversimplified narrative. And then that can beat up Africa again. You guys have got more sunshine. You guys have got more wind. You guys have got more sea. You guys have got more this. What's wrong with you? Get off your butts and do something. That entitles the West to feel that the solution lies where in Africa, whereas it's not as simple as that. So I do think we should be fighting the oversimplification of narratives at all costs, and picking our battles as to what isn't an oversimplification, and be prepared to die for the kind of, let's say, the East Coast fracking that they were doing, and it was worth fighting that. It was worth fighting against Sharar and getting people angry about that. It was a macro event. So it's worth picking those events and having a go at them like we did. And Mandela was particularly strong in the leadership around that. But don't pick issues that are divisive issues. For example, with the taxi, who's right and who's wrong. Don't get caught in that. It's a distraction. That's got very little to do with anything but power and politics and playing out in an ugly way. We have to really keep focusing on what we can do with what we've got, where we are, and what we remember about what we have in terms of our ancestry.
Thank you, John. There are things to keep in mind as we all live and move forward. Lindelwa, you have your hand up. Please go ahead.
No, I just want to agree with what John has just said. The distraction can come in the form of oversimplification. This is huge. This is complex. Even the example that I gave around coal mining or any other form of mining, it's not going to be overnight. There are huge implications that need to be thought through. So I just want to emphasize there's going to be need for very intensive change management, creating awareness, mindset change. So I just wanted to emphasize that. I think that's where the complication is going to be coming from. It's not going to be simple. And remember, when we talk about coal mining, the West still wants coal. So it's not going to just stop like that completely. So it's huge, it's complex. It will need all our heads to come together and find solutions that are sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindelwa, for pointing that out. Yeah, it's true. Because there is still so much financing going into coal minings by the same companies who are also encouraging this green transition. That it's really funny how things are progressing. Thank you, everyone, for engaging on these 3 questions that we had today. We had a lot to discuss, and we have learned so much from each other, and I hope I have learned so much from this conversation, and I hope everyone else has too. Moving forward, we would like to now engage in community updates and community news, so that if you all have anything that you would like to share with the rest of the group, that does not necessarily have to relate to International Youth Day or the theme that we have for this ULC session. It can be regarding anything that you would like to update or you'd like to speak about with us, the rest of the group. Please go ahead. And yeah, Lindelwa, please.
Yes, thank you very much. This has got nothing to do with Youth Day. It's just to announce that I'm a founder of the Climate Coaching Alliance. And it's not just for coaches, it's for other professionals and other people like you guys. I really would like to invite you. We've got a strategic planning session. It's a fairly new organization. We started in May this year. And on the 15th of August at 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock South African time, we've got a strategic planning session just to figure out that how do we as Africans respond to this? Because yes, we've got challenges, we've got drought, we've got floods, we've got all sorts of, but our responses we cannot just cut and paste the responses from the West. And basically because this is part of the global coaching alliance, but the approach is more on co-creation, creating awareness, working with coaches and communities. So I think this discussion was helpful to me, but I would like to invite you to join us in this strategic planning session on the 15th of August. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lindelwa, for sharing that. If you could also just give us the details of this in the chat box, like the just the dates and where and what can be expected from us, then that would be great for everybody. John has already shared something on the chat. It's a news article, I think. Yeah, John, would you like to share?
This was an event that took place yesterday, just to celebrate that young people are activating, and this was one of those events that took place on Constitution Hill in South Africa, in Johannesburg. And yesterday was Women's Day, so it was in South Africa, so it was a celebration of the history of the 1956 march to Union Buildings and the activation that took place there. Just for your joy.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing this, John. Yeah, we'll definitely have a read after the call. Anybody else would like to share something?
I'll share some community news. As Anne had mentioned earlier, we've been working on an international youth initiative, and every week the young people write blogs and articles just to share about their views of the different climate and social economic issues in the environment and their insights on them and their different solutions, etc. So I will share a link to that blog on the chat for everyone to have a look, to read, etc. And if you think that there is a young person in your networks that might be interested in contributing and writing their story, that would be amazing. We also publish a quarterly magazine about different subjects. So the first one was focused on youth from Latin America. The next one was focused on youth and economic systems transformation. The one we'll be doing for the end of the year will be focused on youth in climate resilience and adaptation. So we are actively looking for new writers that will contribute to that magazine. I'll share the link on the chat.
Thank you, Nolita. Is there any more news from the community that we can engage in? Please go ahead.
I'd like to share something in the silence that we set about in our schools network of the LEAP schools and partners to develop vertical gardens and horizontal gardens and to declare them living learning laboratories and to then integrate curriculum with the practice of planting and growing and the science of that. And so we now have 10 hubs where these gardens are fully in action, and the curriculum is being developed around linking the classroom practice to the heritage, to the work. And it's gone beyond what we had anticipated, in that in 3 of the sites, the children are taking plants home and have begun gardens in their very limited space in their own homes. So the early indications of this integration, if you like, of activating people's understanding of their heritage with their needs and their capacity to make a difference, and becomes part of the self-liberating pedagogy that we're developing. So just share that as a celebration. Thanks.
Thank you so much, John. We need these small. This is not a small celebration. This calls for big celebrations, actually. We need these celebrations to move forward. Like I was talking, hope is so important in keeping us resilient and alive. Is there somebody else who would like to share something? If not, we are more than welcome to close early.
I think we needed to do an update on the
working group. Yeah.
Yes, because for the past few sessions, we've been discussing what are the opportunities for us to pursue practically, either in initiatives, etc. The discussions that we have in this this Ubuntu Learning Circle. So there was an open call for invitations or people to nominate themselves for the working group. And then the briefings were sent out. So the group is basically now, I believe, 5 people. Yeah, 5 people who have met for the first time or meeting for the second time next week. At this point, it's still introductions like, hi, my name is so-and-so, this is what I'm working on. Imran is part of it. But the next step is that, well, the ambition is to then go towards developing strategies of what could be joined or collaborations that could be done across members and the circle on the different topics and the themes that we have been discussing regularly. So that's the update on the working group so far, and more information will be coming as things progress.
If you have any questions on the working group itself, please feel free to ask us now, or you can always reach me, Nolita, and Catherine via email. We also have the WhatsApp group, the link to which Catherine has shared on the chat. So yes, we're an open space for all sorts, accepting all sorts of questions and all sorts of discussions at any time.
I think anything to do with climate change and youth, I would be interested.